Evelyn Harper pressed the ring so hard into her palm that the little diamond bit her skin, and still she would not let it go. 3 months she had let herself love that man. 3 months before they branded her father a thief and put him out the servant's door like a stray dog. Now she stood at the front gate of Ashford Manor in the dead heat of a Virginia summer, come to throw the ring at the feet of the man who had ruined her family, not knowing he had been waiting at that door for her all along. If you love a story where a wronged woman walks straight into the lion's den and refuses to break, hit subscribe and stay with me clear to the end. And tell me in the comments which town or city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Evelyn Harper had walked the road to Ashford Manor 100 times in her life, but never once through the front gate. For 22 years, she had come and gone by the kitchen door the way her father had before her and his father before him. She knew the back hall by the smell of beeswax. She knew which board on the servant's stair groaned and which held its tongue. She knew the manor the way a person knows a house they have cleaned but never owned. Today she came up the carriage drive, in broad daylight, with her chin up and her father's name in ruins behind her. The ring was in her coat pocket, wrapped in a square of old linen the way you'd wrap something dead. She had rehearsed the words for 3 days. I have come to return what was never honestly given. I want nothing of yours. My father wants nothing of yours. Do not send for us again. Plain words. Cold words. She had said them to the mirror until they stopped shaking on her tongue. She lifted the brass knocker and let it fall once. The door opened so fast she nearly stepped back. It was old Caleb, the head footman, who had carried her on his shoulders when she was 6. His face did not give her the smile it always gave her. It gave her something else, something careful, like a man holding a hot dish without a cloth. Miss Harper, he said. I'm not here to be announced, Evelyn said. I'll only be a moment. Give this to Mr. Ashford and I'll be gone. She had her hand half into her pocket already. He's expecting you, miss. Her hand stopped. She made herself laugh and it came out wrong. No, he isn't. Nobody knew I was coming. I didn't know till this morning. All the same. Caleb stepped back and held the door wide the way he'd hold it for a senator or a circuit judge. Mr. Ashford's in the study. He gave word you were to be brought straight through. No waiting in the hall. Something cold moved up the back of Evelyn's neck. She knew this house. Nobody got brought straight through. Visitors waited in the front parlor with the good chairs and the bad clock until the master decided whether they were worth his afternoon. That was the rule. That had always been the rule. How long? She asked. Miss, how long has he been expecting me, Caleb? The old man's jaw worked. He had never in his life been able to lie to a child he'd carried on his shoulders, and she watched him fail to do it now. Since this morning, miss, he said quietly. Since right after the post came. The post. The cold thing on her neck spread down between her shoulders. She had told no one her plan. Not her father. God, especially not her father who'd have begged her not to go. Not Mrs. Brooks. Not a soul. She had decided in the dark of her own room at 4 o'clock that morning and walked out before the sun was good and up. So how had a letter reached this house before her telling Nathaniel Ashford she was on her way? Show me, she said. Her voice had gone flat and even. That was the voice she got when she was afraid, not high, not loud. Flat. Her father always said it was the most dangerous thing about her, that calm. Show me the study. The hall ran long and dim and smelled the way it always had, and Evelyn hated that it could still feel like home when she came to hate the man who owned it. Caleb stopped at the study door, knocked twice, and opened it without waiting for an answer. Nathaniel Ashford stood at the far window with his back to the room, hands folded behind him, and he did not turn around. That more than anything undid her composure for one bad second. Because the Nathaniel she'd known, the one she'd been fool enough to soften toward over 14 long months, had a habit of standing up when she entered a room every single time, even when she was only the girl come to balance his ledgers. Most men of his money never rose for anyone. He had risen for her. She had told herself it meant nothing. She had told herself a great many things. He did not rise now. He did not turn. "Thank you, Caleb," he said to the glass. "Close the door." Caleb closed it. And then Evelyn heard the sound that she would think about for the rest of her life, the small, neat click of the bolt. She turned. The door was shut, locked. From the inside by Caleb's hand on Nathaniel's word, and Caleb gone on the other side of it. Her heart slammed once hard. "Open that door," she said. "In a moment. Open it now." She crossed the room and took the latch herself, and it would not give, and she understood it needed a key, and the key was not in the lock. She spun around with her back to the wood. "You will open that door, Mr. Ashford, or so help me. I will put this window out and scream until every man on this place comes running, and then we'll see what your good name's worth." That turned him around at last, and here was the second thing she would carry with her. Always he did not look like a man who had trapped her. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. His coat was the same fine black he always wore, but it hung loose like he'd lost weight inside it. There was gray at his temples she didn't remember. His eyes, the gray and tired eyes that had once made a butler's daughter forget her good sense, went to the spot on her hand where the ring should have been. "You took it off," he said. "That's what I came to do." She got her hand back into her pocket around the linen bundle, holding it like a stone she meant to throw. "And you knew that. You knew before I knocked, so let's not waste each other's afternoon. Here." She pulled it out. The linen fell away. The little ring sat in her palm, the diamond throwing one weak spark in the low light. "Take it. We're done. My father and I are done with this house with your name with all of it." He did not move to take the ring. "Sit down, Evelyn." "Miss Harper." For a moment something crossed his face she could not have named it. Then he nodded slow, like a man taking a deserved blow. "Miss Harper, please, sit down." "I'll stand." "Then I'll stand too." He came around the desk and stopped a good 6 feet off, careful like she was a horse that might bolt. "I asked Caleb to lock the door for one reason, and I'll tell it to you plain, because I think plain is the only thing you'll believe from me now. If that door's open, you walk out. You walk out, and you marry your certainty that I'm the man who ruined Thomas Harper, and you take it to your grave, and you raise it up like a wall between you and the truth for the rest of your days. I can't allow that. Not for 15 minutes more." "You can't allow it." She laughed again, that wrong laugh. "Listen to yourself. You don't allow or not allow me anything anymore. That ended the day you stood in your own dining room and let your uncle call my father a thief to his face and said nothing." The words landed. She saw them land. He went white around the mouth. "I wasn't in that room," he said. "You were in this house. I was 3 days' ride from this house in Richmond, on a matter your father himself begged me to settle." He took one step closer and stopped when she pressed harder to the door. "I came back to find Thomas gone, you gone, the whole place turned on its head, and a story going round the county that I'd thrown a man out the door after 35 years for stealing from me. I never threw your father out, Evelyn. I would sooner have thrown out my own arm." "Don't." Her voice cracked on it the first crack, and she hated herself for it. "Don't you stand there and you sign the letters. I read them. The dismissal. The accusation laid out point by point. The order that he be off the property by week's end and not given a character. Your name was on the bottom of every page in your own hand. Don't tell me you weren't in that room when your signature was." And there it was. She watched the words hit him, and she expected him to flinch, to bluster, to do what guilty men did. Instead, his face went very still and very cold and very focused, and he said the thing that began to take her whole world apart. "Show me," he said. "What?" "The letters. You said you read them. Did you keep them? Are they on you? I'm not a fool. I gave them back." "To whom?" "To—" She stopped. "To Richard. To his uncle." Of course she had. Richard Ashford had pressed the dismissal papers into her hands himself, weeping. Crocodile tears, saying, the poor man, the poor man. I tried to talk Nathaniel out of it. You must believe I tried. And she had read them in a fury, and thrown them down on the desk, and Richard had gathered them up gently and put them away for safekeeping, dear, in case your father wants to appeal. She heard her own voice go thin. Your uncle has them. Nathaniel closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, there was a kind of grief in them that had nothing to do with her. Of course he does, he said softly. Of course he does. Sit, he said again, and this time it was not a command. It was almost a plea, and almost worse for it. Please, I'm not going to touch you. I'm not going to keep you past your 15 minutes if you want gone after. But I am going to show you something, and you can't see it standing at the door like you mean to run me through with a poker. Evelyn did not sit, but she came off the door. That was as far as she'd give him, and they both knew it for what it was. He went to the desk, and from the bottom drawer he drew out a leather folio fat and tied with a cord, and the sight of it pinched something in her chest, because she knew that folio. She had organized that folio 14 months ago, when she'd first been brought into this house to put the estate's papers in order. She had built that very thing with her own hands, sorting decades of Ashford correspondence into a system only she could read. You kept it, she said before she could stop herself. I keep everything you ever touched in this house, he said, not looking up, untying the cord. Which is a sentence I had not meant to say out loud. Forget I said it. He laid 3 pages on the desk and turned them to face her. Come look. You don't have to come close to me. Come close to these. She came. She told herself it was only to see how good the forgery was. She told herself a great many things. The 3 pages were letters in Nathaniel's hand. Old ones, real ones. Notes he'd written to her over the months of their strange arrangement. Miss Harper, the South Ledger wants your eye before Thursday, that kind of thing. She remembered every one. She had, God forgive her, kept a few herself in a drawer like a girl. Look at the way I make a capital H, he said. Look at Harper. Look at the cross of the T in Thursday. Now. He reached past her, careful not to brush her sleeve, and laid down a 4th page. This came back to me last week from the magistrate's clerk in town. It's a copy he made of the dismissal, the one you read, the one with my name on the bottom. Evelyn looked, and the floor of her certainty cracked clean down the middle. She was a clerk's daughter. More than that, she was the clerk, the one who'd put 14 years of this estate's accounts into a single fair hand because the master of it could read a balance sheet but couldn't keep his own correspondence straight to save his life. She knew handwriting the way a fisherman knows water. She'd have caught this in 2 seconds across a desk if her grief hadn't been screaming so loud the day she first read it. The H was wrong. It was a beautiful forgery. It was a patient forgery made by someone who'd had years to study the original. But the H on the dismissal had a little hook at the top that Nathaniel's H never had, not once, not in 3 pages of proof in front of her. And the T in thief, he didn't cross his T's like that. He never had. His crossbar rode high and short and impatient, like he hadn't time for the rest of the word. The crossbar on the forgery sat low and long and careful. Careful, like a man copying, like a man with all the time in the world and a guilty reason to be slow. No, Evelyn said. It came out as barely anything. No, this doesn't... Look at the spelling. Nathaniel said, very quiet now, very gentle, like he could see the ground giving way under her and was trying not to push. I spell honorable without the U. Always have since school. It's a habit my tutor beat into me, and another beat half out. Find me the word honorable on that page. She found it. Conduct unbecoming and dishonorable, with the U. I have never in my life, Nathaniel said, put a U in that word. Evelyn put her hand flat on the desk, because she had begun, very slightly, to shake. You're saying you didn't write it? Her voice had gone strange and far off in her own ears. You're saying somebody forged your hand, to put my father out? I'm saying I never saw that letter until 8 days ago, Nathaniel said. I'm saying I never wrote a word against Thomas Harper in my life, because in 35 years, that man never gave me cause, and the day I came home to find him gone, I tore this house apart looking for him. I rode to your old cottage. It was let to someone else. The new tenant said the Harpers had gone north to your aunt, and didn't I know I'd put them out myself? His jaw tightened. I have spent 8 days, Miss Harper, trying to find where you'd gone so I could... He stopped, made himself say it differently. So, I could put it right. And then this morning, a letter came telling me you were on this road with my ring in your pocket and murder in your heart. And I confess, I have never been so glad to be hated by anyone in my life, because at least it meant you were found. She heard maybe half of it. Her mind had run ahead the way a good clerk's mind does down the cold straight road of who. The letter that came this morning, she said slowly, telling you I was coming. Who sent it? For the first time, Nathaniel hesitated. Who, Mr. Ashford? It wasn't signed. You're lying. I'm not. He went into the same drawer and brought out one more page and laid it down apart from the others, like something he didn't want touching the rest. It came folded inside the Morning Post, no direction on it in a hand I didn't know. 3 lines. Read it yourself. Evelyn picked it up. Her hands were not quite steady. She read, "The Harper girl rides for the manor today to throw your ring in your face. Receive her kindly. Let her say her piece, and send her off forever. It is better for the estate that this match die quietly. A friend who wishes you both well." She read it twice, then a third time. And on the third time the clerk in her, the one who could not unsee a hooked H or a low crossbar, saw the thing that mattered, and her blood went to ice. "Whoever wrote this," she said very slowly, "knew I'd decided to come before I told anyone." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "I told no one. I decided at 4 this morning. I walked out before sunup. Nobody saw me, but..." She stopped. "But who, Evelyn?" "But the man who's been letting us a room since my father lost his place," she whispered. "In town, above the apothecary. We took 2 rooms there 8 weeks ago. The rent was..." The cold spread and spread. The rent was cheap. Strangely cheap. A kind benefactor, the landlord said. Some friend of the family covering the difference who wished to stay unnamed. Across the desk, Nathaniel Ashford had gone perfectly still. "Someone has been paying to keep you close and watched," he said. "Someone knew the hour you'd leave. Someone got word to this house faster than you could walk it." He looked down at the unsigned letter, and then up at her, and his voice when it came was low and even and terrible. "Someone wanted this match dead, Evelyn. Badly enough to plan it like a campaign. And there is only one man in my life who'd profit from your father's ruin and my marriage's grave both at once." She knew. Of course she knew. She'd known the shape of it for 30 seconds and been too afraid to say it. "Your uncle," she said. "My uncle," Nathaniel agreed. The silence after that was not the silence of the start. The start had been 2 people on opposite sides of a war. This was something else. This was 2 people standing on the same cold ground, realizing they'd been standing there the whole time, and that someone had built a wall between them brick by patient brick to keep them from ever turning and seeing each other across it. Evelyn sat down. She hadn't meant to. Her legs simply decided it for her. She sat in the hard chair by the desk, not the soft visitor's chair. The hard clerk's chair she'd sat in for 14 months, balancing his books, and she put the unsigned letter down on the wood with a care that surprised her, and she pressed her 2 hands flat on top of it, like she could hold the whole unraveling world still beneath her palms. "My father," she said, "is 63 years old. He gave this house 35 years. He went out the servant's door. He'd kept polished his whole life with everyone in the county believing he'd stolen, and he has not been the same man since. He doesn't sleep. He won't eat right. He sits by the window in those 2 cheap rooms, and he says, 'It doesn't matter what people think. A clear conscience is enough,' and he is lying. Mr. Ashford, because it is killing him. The not being believed is killing him faster than any sickness could." Her voice did not rise. It stayed flat and even. And that was how he knew, that was how anyone who knew her knew how close she was to the edge of herself. "And I came here today certain you'd done it. I came to spit your ring back at you. And now you're telling me..." "I'm telling you the man who did it is my own blood. Nathaniel said, "and that he sat at my table the night I rode out and shook your father's hand and called him old friend, and that I am going to make him answer for every gray hair he's put on that good man's head, if it takes the rest of my life and every dollar I own." "Why?" She looked up at him. "Why would I believe that? Give me one reason that isn't because you say so. You're rich. You're an Ashford. Your name carries in this county, and ours carries nothing now. Why should I believe you mean to ruin your own kin to clear a butler's name?" Nathaniel was quiet a moment. Then he came around the desk, slow, telling her every step with his eyes, so she wouldn't startle, and he did the thing she would remember longest of all from that locked and airless room. He crouched down. A man worth more than half the county in his fine black coat crouched down on his heels beside the hard clerk's chair, so that for the first time she was looking down at him, instead of up, so that whatever power his height and his money and his name gave him, he set it on the floor between them. "Because your father taught me to ride," he said. She blinked. "You don't know that," Nathaniel said. "Why would you? You were a baby. My own father was a hard man and a busy one, and he had no time for a boy. And it was Thomas Harper who put me up on my first pony and walked beside me round the paddock for a whole summer, holding the lead and telling me I had good hands. I had good hands, a thing nobody in my own family ever told me about anything. He covered for me when I broke the orangery glass. He fished me out of the mill pond when I was 9 and never told a soul I'd been fool enough to fall in. When my mother died, he was the one who came and sat with me. A servant sat with the master's son in the dark because no one else thought to, and he didn't say a word. He just sat all night so I wouldn't be alone with it." Nathaniel's jaw worked. "Your father is the nearest thing to a kind father I have ever had in this life, Evelyn Harper. So you ask me why I'd ruin my own blood to clear a butler's name?" He shook his head. "There is no butler in this. There never was. There is only a man I love being called a thief, and the people who did it, and me finally home, finally knowing. You don't have to believe a word I've said about anything else, but believe that." Evelyn Harper, who had not cried once, not when the papers came, not when her father went gray and silent, not in 8 weeks of cheap rooms above an apothecary, not on the whole long road to this house with murder in her heart, felt her eyes go hot and full, and she turned her face to the window so he would not see. And her voice, when it finally came, was not flat anymore. "He still keeps your boyhood pony's shoe," she said, "on a nail by his bed. I never knew why. He never said." She pressed the back of her wrist hard against her eyes. "He never said one bad word about you, even at the worst of it. I called you every name I had, and he'd say, 'That's not the Nathaniel I raised up. Somebody's got at that boy.' I thought it was an old man's loyalty making him soft." A laugh broke out of her, wet and disbelieving. "He was right. My father was right, and I came here to throw your ring at you." "You came here," Nathaniel said quietly, still down on his heels beside her, "to defend a man you love against someone you believed had wronged him alone, into a house full of people who could ruin you without a soul knowing where you'd gone. That is the bravest and the most foolish thing I have ever seen anyone do, and I have spent 14 months learning that there is no one in this world I would rather have at my back in a fight. So you'll forgive me." His voice roughened, "Just slightly, if I'm not minded to take the ring back just yet." She turned and looked at him. The little ring was still in her hand. She had been clutching it so long, the diamond had pressed a small red crescent into her palm. "I don't know what you are to me anymore," she said honestly. "I came here certain. Now I'm not certain of anything except that my father was right and I was wrong, and there's a man somewhere in this county who built a machine out of forged letters and cheap rent to break 2 families at once, and he's still out there, and he doesn't know yet that we found each other." She closed her fingers over the ring again, but differently now. Not like a stone to throw, like something she meant to keep at least till she'd decided. "I don't want a marriage of duty, Mr. Ashford. I never did. If that's what's left of this, you can have your ring, and I'll go." "It was never duty," Nathaniel said. "Not for me." That's another sentence I hadn't meant to say out loud. Then stop saying you hadn't meant to, and just say things, she said, and it came out half a sob and half a laugh, and it was the most honest thing either of them had managed all afternoon. He stood. He went to the door, and he turned the key in the lock and opened it wide. The door he'd bolted to keep her from running, opened now with his own hand, throwing it back so it stood open onto the long, dim hall. There, he said. Open. You can walk out any moment you choose, and I won't stop you, and I'll have Caleb bring the carriage to take you back to town in comfort, because you will not walk that road again in this heat for any man living. He stood beside the open door, holding nothing back, holding her to nothing. Or you can sit down in that hard chair you've never once let me trade for a soft one, and you can help me do the thing you and I were both put on this earth to do, which is read every page in this house until we find the seam where my uncle's lie meets the truth, and then pull on it until the whole thing comes down on his head. He let that settle. 15 minutes I asked for. They're up. You're free to go. So I'll ask you the only honest question I've got left, and you can answer it however you please. Evelyn looked at the open door, the hall beyond it, the road beyond that, the 2 cheap rooms above the apothecary, and her father by the window, with a pony's shoe on a nail going gray with the weight of being disbelieved. She looked back at Nathaniel Ashford standing in his own house, with the door thrown open like a man who'd finally stopped trying to lock anything in. Ask it, she said. He looked at her a long moment. Will you stay? Nathaniel said, and help me clear your father's name? And Evelyn Harper, Butler's daughter, who had come to that house through the front gate for the first time in her life, carrying a ring she'd meant to throw, set the ring down gently on the corner of the desk where they could both see it, and pulled the hard clerk's chair an inch closer to the lamp and reached for the leather folio she'd built with her own 2 hands 14 months before. Bring me every letter that man ever touched, she said, and shut that door. Not because I can't leave, because what we're about to read is no one's business but ours. Nathaniel Ashford crossed the room and closed the door, and this time he did not lock it. He didn't have to. The folio fell open between them, and Evelyn's hands knew it, the way her hands knew bread dough or a darning needle without being told. Start me at the beginning, she said. Not the dismissal. Before. 14 months back when I first came into this house. I want to walk it the way it happened because somewhere along that road I stopped being able to see straight, and I want to find the place where the lie got in. You came in the March, Nathaniel said. He'd pulled a second chair around to her side of the desk close, but not too close, and he kept his hands flat on the wood where she could see them. After the trouble with the South accounts, after your uncle said the South accounts were a mess, she found the ledger she wanted and laid it open. And they were. But you know what I found when I got into them? They weren't a mess from neglect. They were a mess from handling. Somebody had been in those books with a careful hand, turning ones into sevens, smudging a date here, lifting a figure there. I told you so. Do you remember what you said? I said it was likely old Foster's bad arithmetic. Nathaniel's jaw set. Foster, who'd kept the books for 30 years and never been a dollar out in his life. And who died that winter, Evelyn said quietly. Very sudden of a chill 2 weeks after I told your uncle to his face that the South accounts had been altered. The words sat in the room. Nathaniel went still. You never told me that. I told your uncle. I thought I was telling the man who managed the estate. I thought that's who you took such things to. She turned a page, and her voice had gone flat again, the dangerous flat. He thanked me. He said, "Clever girl, leave it with me. I'll get to the bottom of it." And then Foster was dead, and the matter was closed, and your uncle hired me on permanent to keep the books fair going forward where he could watch me. I thought it was a kindness. A short breath. I was 21, and I thought a great many things were kindness. Evelyn. Nathaniel's voice had dropped. Are you telling me Foster was murdered? I'm telling you, a man who'd kept clean books for 30 years found out somebody was cooking them and died before he could say so. And the only people who knew he'd found out were me, your uncle, and now Foster's in the ground. She didn't look up from the page. I'm telling you I don't know. I'm telling you I've been afraid to know for 14 months. There's a difference, and you'll learn it living the way I've lived this last year. He reached over, careful, slow, the way he did everything around her now, and laid one finger on the corner of the ledger, not to take it, just to anchor himself to the same page. Then we'll know now, he said. Together. Read me the South accounts. All of them. So she did. She read them the way only the person who'd built the system could. And within 20 minutes, she'd shown him the thing that had taken her 3 weeks to see. The first time back when she was new and trusting and didn't know to look for a thief. There was a tenant farm on the south edge of the Ashford land, 40 acres good, bottomland leased out for cash rent every quarter. The rent came in. She showed him where it came in 4 times a year, a steady fat sum. And here's where it goes out again, she said. Same day near enough. Out to a holding called Marrow and Vein for upkeep and improvements. Every quarter. Same amount, give or take. The rent comes in the front door and walks straight out the back to Marrow and Vein. I never heard of Marrow and Vein. Neither had anyone. I asked. Mrs. Brooks never heard of them. Caleb never heard of them. The tenant on that farm? She stopped. I rode out there myself once, on a Sunday when I was supposed to be at church. The man on that farm laughed at me. He said no improvements had been done to that land in 20 years, no upkeep, nobody'd so much as fix the gate. He said, Miss, if somebody's being paid to improve this place, I'd surely like to meet him. Nathaniel had gone white. Then where's the money going? That, Evelyn said, is what Foster found out. I'm near certain of it. Because look. She flipped back 2 years in the ledger, then 3, then 5, and her finger came down on a clean, even line of Foster's old crabbed handwriting. 5 years ago, there's no Marrow and Vein. The south rent comes in and stays in. Then here, she moved her finger 1 quarter forward. Marrow and Vein appears, and the south rent starts walking out the back door, and it never stops. 5 years, 4 times a year, a fat sum each time. She did the arithmetic out loud fast, the way her father had taught her, no pen needed. That's better than $9,000, Mr. Ashford. $9,000 gone out of your estate into a firm that does no work on a farm that's seen no improvement in 5 years. The number hung there. Nathaniel sat back like he'd been struck. My uncle, he said slowly, told me 3 years ago that the estate was overextended. That we had to economize. That's why he brought you in cheap, a butler's daughter instead of a proper steward, because we couldn't afford a proper steward. He stood in this room and told me we were close to the bone, while $9,000 walked out the back door to a company that doesn't exist. Does it exist? Nathaniel leaned forward. Marrow and Vein. Is it a real firm? Is there a real office? Real men? And here Evelyn went quiet in a different way. Not the dangerous flat, but something more like dread. There's a real name, she said. On the rent agreements. The man who signs for Marrow and Vein quarter after quarter accepting your money. She turned to the very back of the folio to a thin packet of papers she'd tied off separate from the rest, and she undid the cord with hands that had begun to go unsteady again. I didn't show this to you 14 months ago because 14 months ago I didn't understand it. I filed it. I'm a clerk. I file things I don't understand and hope they'll make sense later. She slid the top page across. It made sense later. Nathaniel looked down at the signature at the bottom of the page, and the room got very cold. Because the name signed for Marrow and Vein in a careful, practiced, patient hand, a hand that crossed its T's low and long, that hooked the tops of its capitals, was not Richard Ashford's name at all. It was Thomas Harper's. No, Evelyn said. She said it before she even knew she was going to. She was on her feet. No, that's not my father. He'd never signed for a thing he didn't understand. He'd never... Evelyn, my father has signed his name the same way for 40 years, and I would know it anywhere, and that... She jabbed a finger at the page, her whole arm shaking now. That is not his hand. Look at it. Look at it. He doesn't hook his H. He never... She stopped. Her own words caught up to her. She went very, very still. "He never hooks his H," Nathaniel said softly. "He never hooks his H," Evelyn repeated, and her voice had gone to a whisper. She sat back down slow, like a woman lowering herself into cold water. "But whoever forged your hand on the dismissal, they hooked yours. They put a hook on a capital that doesn't have one." She pulled the dismissal letter back over and the rent agreement and laid them side by side, and her clerk's eye went back and forth between them, back and forth, and her face changed by degrees from grief into something harder and brighter and far more dangerous. "It's the same hand." "What?" "It's the same forger." She was nearly breathless now, the words tumbling. "Whoever forged your signature on the dismissal to ruin my father, that same hand forged my father's signature on these rent agreements to make him the thief. Look at the hook. Look at the low crossbar. It's a habit. Every forger's got habits. They can't shake things their own hand wants to do, even while they're copying somebody else's. This man hooks his capitals and rides his crossbars low, no matter whose name he's faking. He did it to you, and he did it to my father with the same pen." Nathaniel stared at the 2 pages. "So it was always one plan," he said slowly. "Not 2 crimes. 1. He's been bleeding the estate dry for 5 years through this marrow and vein signing your father's name to it, building a paper trail that made Thomas Harper look like the thief the whole time. So that when the day came that somebody got close to the truth," Evelyn finished, "the evidence was already laid. 5 years of forged agreements in my father's hand, sitting in a drawer ready. He didn't have to invent my father's guilt at the last minute. He'd been writing it for half a decade." "And then you came in," Nathaniel said. "Clever girl, good with figures, good with handwriting, and I started finding the marrow and vein payments." Evelyn pressed both hands to her mouth for a moment. When she lowered them, her eyes were wet and furious. "I started pulling on the thread, and he couldn't have that. So he... She couldn't finish it. "So he moved up his plan," Nathaniel said grimly. "He ruined your father before you could prove your father innocent. He got Thomas out of this house and out of the county with everyone believing he'd stolen $9,000, and he forged my hand on the dismissal so that even I'd look like part of it. So that you'd hate me. So that you'd take your sharp eyes and your dangerous gift for figures and leave this house forever hating us both, never to look in a ledger again." "It almost worked," Evelyn whispered. "It came within 15 minutes of working," Nathaniel said. "Within one locked door." They sat with that. Then from somewhere deep in the house, far down the long hall, there came the sound of the front door and a man's voice, loud, easy, jovial. The voice of a man who owned the air he walked through, calling out, "Caleb, Caleb, you old goat! Whose carriage is that on my drive? Have we company?" Evelyn's whole body went rigid. "That's him," she breathed. "That's your uncle." Nathaniel was on his feet before she finished saying it, and for 1 second she saw the man. The county respected the still, slow, careful man go hard and fast, and certain all the gentleness packed away. "He can't find you here," he said low. "Not like this. Not with these papers out." "Why not?" "Let him. Let me say to his face." "Because you have nothing," Nathaniel said, urgent, gripping the back of her chair. "Evelyn, listen to me, listen fast. We have a ledger and 2 letters and a clerk's good eye. That's enough for you and me. It is not enough for a magistrate. He's been building his lie for 5 years, and ours is an afternoon old. If he knows tonight that we've found each other, that you're in this house, that we've opened these books together, he'll burn every original he's got before sunrise. Marrow and vein will vanish. The rent agreements will go in the fire. And then it's your word and mine against an Ashford who manages the whole estate, and you're a dismissed servant's daughter, and I'm a man half the county already half believes turned on a loyal butler. We will lose." His hand tightened. "He cannot know we know. Not yet. Not for one more day. Do you understand me?" She understood. God help her, she understood. And she hated it because every part of her wanted to walk down that hall and call Richard Ashford a thief and a murderer to his smiling face. "Then hide me," she said. "Caleb?" The voice was closer. Boot heels on the hall floor. "Caleb, I'll find out myself then." Nathaniel swept the papers together with both hands, fast, not bothering with the cord, and shoved the whole folio into the bottom drawer and turned the little key and dropped it in his waistcoat pocket. Then he caught Evelyn by the wrist the first time he'd touched her all afternoon, and pulled her toward the far end of the room, toward the curtained alcove, where the estate maps hung, and put her behind the heavy fall of cloth with a single look that said not a sound. She pressed back into the dark. Her heart was going so hard she was sure it could be heard across the room. The study door opened. "There you are." Richard Ashford's voice, warm as a hearth, false as a $3 bill. "Hiding in here with the door shut on a fine summer afternoon. Whose carriage, Nathaniel? Don't tell me it's that tedious Carter come about the boundary again." "It's mine," Nathaniel said, and Evelyn marveled even in her terror at how easy he made it sound. "I had Caleb bring it round. I'm riding into town within the hour." "Town in this heat?" "Whatever for—" "The bank," Nathaniel said. "I want to look at the quarter's figures myself." There was the smallest pause. Evelyn behind the curtain felt it like a dropped stitch. "The figures," Richard said. "Whatever's got into you about figures, you've never had a head for them. That's what we keep the books for." "That's what we kept the Harper girl for," Nathaniel said evenly. "And now we don't, do we? So I'll learn to read my own books. A man ought to know his own affairs." Another pause. Longer. "Now, Nathaniel." And here Richard's voice changed. Softened, went sorrowful and kind, and Evelyn behind the curtain had to press her own hand over her mouth because she'd heard that voice before, heard it weep crocodile tears over her father's dismissal. "I know the Harper business has sat ill with you. It's sat ill with me too, son, you know that. I tried to talk you out of letting Thomas go. I begged you to give the old man a chance to make it right. But the evidence was the evidence. $9,000 don't walk off on their own. And you signed the dismissal yourself. It broke my heart to watch you do it, but you did the honorable thing." Behind the curtain, Evelyn closed her eyes. He signed it himself. The lie laid down so smooth, so gentle, repeated so many times that even Richard might half believe it now. "I did," Nathaniel said. "Just that." Evelyn's eyes flew open. "I did. Was he? I did the thing I thought honorable," Nathaniel went on slow, "with the evidence I was given. A man can do no more than that. Can he, uncle? Act honorably on the evidence he's given." A beat. "And if it turned out the evidence was false, why then the dishonor wouldn't be the signer's, would it? It'd belong entirely to whoever gave him the false evidence." The silence that followed had weight. "What a strange thing to say," Richard said at last, light again, but Evelyn heard the new thread of caution under it. "What's brought this on?" "Grief, I expect," Nathaniel said. "Thomas Harper taught me to ride. Did you know that I find I've been thinking on it? Now the bank closes at 5 and I mean to be there. Walk me to the carriage, uncle. Tell me again about the economies. I want to understand the estate's affairs better than I have." His voice came nearer the door, drawing the older man with it. "I want to understand them very well going forward." And the two of them went out, and the door closed, and Evelyn stood alone in the dark behind the curtain, with her heart slamming and her mind racing. And she understood that Nathaniel Ashford had just walked his uncle out of the room and down the drive to keep him from sitting back down at that desk, and to buy her time, and to plant deliberate patient a hook of his own, a small cold seed of fear in the heart of a man who'd thought himself entirely safe. She did not come out from behind the curtain for a long time. When she finally did, the room was empty, and the light had gone gold and long, and she stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, shaking not from cold. She heard the carriage go down the drive. She heard it a long while growing fainter, and only when it had gone entirely did the study door open again, and Nathaniel came in alone and shut it behind him, and leaned his back against it, and let out a long breath like a man who'd been under water. "He's gone to ride alongside me as far as the crossroad," he said. He thinks I've truly gone to the bank. I told Caleb to take the carriage on slow and circle back for you after dark by the kitchen lane, so no one sees you leave. He pushed off the door. Evelyn, are you all right? He killed Foster, she said. Her voice came out wrong, high and thin. Didn't he? Listen to him. Listen to how easy he lies. $9,000 don't walk off on their own. He knows exactly where they walked off to. He walked them off himself. And Foster found out, and Foster died. And now my father... Her voice broke fully, and she pressed her wrist to her mouth and turned away from him, furious at herself. I'm sorry. I don't cry. I never cry. I don't know what's... You've held it 14 months, Nathaniel said low behind her. It's allowed to come out the day you set it down. It is not allowed, she said fiercely, scrubbing at her face. Crying doesn't clear my father's name. Crying doesn't put that man in front of a magistrate. I need to think. She rounded on him, eyes red and bright and absolutely set. We need the originals. You said it yourself. We need the marrow and vein agreements, the real ones, the originals in my father's forged hand, and the South account ledgers and the dismissal, the original dismissal, not the clerk's copy. Where does your uncle keep his papers? His own study, the East Wing. He keeps it locked. Who has a key? He does. Nathaniel paused. And Mrs. Brooks. She does for that room for cleaning. She's the only one he trusts in there. Mrs. Brooks. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Abigail Brooks. She's been in this house 30 years. She knew my father. She knew Foster. She took a step. Where is she now? This time of day, the still room likely, or... Nathaniel stopped. Evelyn. No. We can't bring anyone in. If she's loyal to him, is she... He opened his mouth, closed it. I don't know, he admitted. I thought I knew who was loyal to whom in this house. I find I knew nothing. I didn't even know my own uncle was robbing me blind in my own ledgers. Then we find out, Evelyn said. Carefully, but we find out because we cannot get into that locked room without her, and we cannot wait because that man is riding back to this house tonight with a cold little seed of worry in him that you planted, and the first thing a worried thief does is go and look at the thing he's afraid will be found. She was already moving toward the door. If he so much as glances at those agreements tonight and gets the wind up, they'll be ash by morning. We don't have a day, we have hours. Nathaniel caught her arm. And if Mrs. Brooks runs straight to him... Evelyn looked at his hand on her arm and then up at his face, and something in her had gone past fear into the cold, clear country beyond it. Then we'll know that too, she said. And we'll know it tonight while there's still time to do something about it instead of tomorrow when there isn't. Let go of my arm, Mr. Ashford. I've been afraid in this house for 14 months. I'm done being afraid in it. Take me to Mrs. Brooks. They found her in the still room, just as he'd guessed, up to her elbows in summer fruit. A broad gray woman with flour on her apron, and her sleeves rolled. And when she looked up and saw who stood in the doorway, not the master, but the master and Evelyn Harper. The paring knife went still in her hand, and her face did a thing that told Evelyn more in 1 second than an hour of talk would have. It went pale. Then it went frightened. And then, this was the part Evelyn watched for. The part that mattered, it went relieved. A bone-deep, near-collapsing relief, the relief of a person who's been carrying a thing too heavy for too long and has just seen maybe someone come to help carry it. Lord have mercy, Mrs. Brooks said. The knife clattered down. Lord have mercy, child, you're alive and well, I've prayed. She caught herself. Her eyes darted to Nathaniel, then to the door behind them, then back. Her voice dropped to nearly nothing. Where is he? Where's Mr. Richard? Gone to town, Nathaniel said. An hour at least, more. You're certain? I rode him to the crossroad myself. Mrs. Brooks wiped her hands on her apron slow, and Evelyn saw they were shaking. Then shut that door, the housekeeper said. Shut it and bolt it. And God forgive me because I should have spoken a year ago, and a man's good name's been dragged through the mud because I held my tongue. And I'll answer for it on the last day. The door shut. The bolt slid. You knew, Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. You knew my father didn't take that money. I knew your father couldn't have taken a stale crust without it eating him alive, Mrs. Brooks said. 35 years I worked beside Thomas Harper. That man gave back a shilling once when the fishmonger overpaid him in change, walked 2 miles in the rain to give it back. That man a thief of $9,000, I'd sooner believe it of the parson. Her chin trembled. But I held my tongue, because I was afraid. And I'll tell you why I was afraid, and then you can think of me what you like. Tell us, Nathaniel said quietly. Because of Foster, said Mrs. Brooks. Evelyn's breath stopped. Old Foster come to me? The housekeeper went on. The winter before he died, white as a sheet he was. He'd found something in the books, he said, money going out the South accounts to a firm that wasn't real. He didn't know what to do. He was a careful man. Foster didn't want to accuse without proof, didn't want to go to the master and be wrong. He said he was going to go quiet to Mr. Richard first, give him the chance to explain, because surely there was an explanation. Mrs. Brooks's voice cracked. I told him, God forgive me, I told him, yes, Foster. That's the right and proper thing, go to Mr. Richard. And he did. And 2 weeks later, he was dead of a chill in his own bed, a man who'd not had so much as a sniffle in 30 years. Dead in 2 days, and laid in the ground before the week was out, and Mr. Richard so kind about the funeral, so generous, paid for the stone himself. She was weeping now openly, the way Evelyn could not let herself. And I knew. God help me, I knew the moment I heard, I knew what I'd done. I'd sent that good old man to the one who'd... She couldn't say it. And so you held your tongue, Evelyn said softly. When my father was accused. Because you were afraid of going the way Foster went. I'm 55 years old, and I've got a sister in Maryland, depends on what I send her, Mrs. Brooks whispered. And I told myself, what good's a dead housekeeper to Thomas Harper? I told myself, you'd find your way, you were clever, you'd land somewhere. I told myself 100 things, every one of them, a coward's prayer, and I've not slept a clean night since. She lifted her streaming face. And now you're here. The both of you together, which I never thought to see, because I was told, we were all told below stairs, that the master himself had cast Thomas out and broke the engagement, and that you child hated him for it. That's what we were meant to think, Nathaniel said. All of us. He set us against each other, so neither would think to compare notes. Mrs. Brooks. He took a step toward her. You have a key to his study. The old woman went still. I do, she said. We need to get into it, tonight, before he comes home. He keeps the agreements in there, Evelyn said. The forged ones, the originals, and the South ledgers, the real ones, before he had them recopied. And he's coming home tonight afraid, mister. Ashford put a fright in him this afternoon on purpose to flush him, which means tonight may be the last night those papers exist, because a frightened thief burns his evidence. We need them in our hands before he gets home, or we lose everything, and my father dies a thief in the eyes of the world. Mrs. Brooks looked from one of them to the other. And then the strangest thing happened. The thing Evelyn would remember when she remembered this whole terrible summer. The old housekeeper drew herself up. The fear didn't leave her face. But something climbed in alongside it, something older and harder. The spine of a woman who'd carried a guilty secret for 2 winters and had just been handed the chance to set it down by doing instead of hiding. Foster was good to me when I came here. A frightened girl of 20, Mrs. Brooks said. And I sent him to his grave with a kind word and a coward's heart. I've a debt to that dead man I can't ever pay him. She pulled her key ring from her apron pocket, and her hand wasn't shaking anymore. But I can pay a piece of it to Thomas Harper. Yes, I'll open that room. God forgive me for not doing it a year ago. I'll open it tonight. Go. The east wing was dim and cool and dead quiet, and the 3 of them moved through it like conspirators, which is what they were. Mrs. Brooks went first with her ring of keys, then Nathaniel, then Evelyn, and not one of them spoke above a breath until they stood at the heavy oak door of Richard Ashford's private study. He'll know, Mrs. Brooks whispered, fitting the key. If we move so much as a paperweight, he'll know. He keeps this room like a man who counts his teeth at night. Then we don't take anything, Evelyn said. Not yet. We copy. I copy fast and fair, and I copy true. It's the one thing in this world I do better than anyone. We find the originals. I copy every line, and we put the originals back exactly where they sat. He never knows we were here. And then we have the proof in my hand, and the originals stay in his room where he thinks they're safe, until the day we want a magistrate to walk in and find them. Nathaniel looked at her. You'd copy $9,000 of forged agreements by hand, tonight, in the dark. I'd copy them by candlelight in my sleep, Evelyn said. Open the door, Mrs. Brooks. The lock turned, the door swung, and the three of them stepped into the lion's own den. It took Evelyn 4 minutes to find where everything was, because Richard Ashford, for all his cunning, was a man of habit, and habit is a clerk's best friend. The locked drawer of his desk gave up to the smallest key on Mrs. Brooks's ring. And inside it, there, Evelyn breathed, the marrow and vein agreements. The originals. 5 years of them quarter by quarter tied in a black ribbon, each one signed at the bottom in a forged hand that hooked its H and wrote its crossbar low, her father's name written by a thief more than 20 times over. And beneath them, the Old South ledgers, the real ones before Richard had had them recopied clean, the ones that showed the money walking out the back door before any cover had been laid over the tracks. And beneath those, at the very bottom of the drawer, was a single folded letter that Evelyn almost left unread in her hurry, and then didn't, because the hand on the outside of it caught her eye. She froze. What is it? Nathaniel was at her shoulder. Evelyn, what? She unfolded it with hands gone cold. It was a letter. Recent, the date was only 6 weeks old. It was addressed to Richard Ashford. And it was signed at the bottom by a name Evelyn knew, a name from town, a name she'd heard spoken kindly in 2 cheap rooms above an apothecary, not 3 days past. It's from our landlord, she whispered. The man who lets us our rooms, the kind benefactor. Her eyes flew down the page. Sir, as instructed, the Harpers remain settled above the apothecary, and I keep close watch. The old man is failing fast. He sits at the window all day and speaks to no one. The girl goes out little. Should her spirit turn, or should she make any move toward the manor or the law, I will send word by the fast post the same hour. Your continued kindness in the matter of the rent is as ever most. She couldn't read the rest. Her hands had begun to shake too hard. He's been watching us, she said. Her voice came out cracked down the middle. He didn't just ruin us and turn us out. He's kept us where he could see us. He's been paying a man to sit and watch my father die by inches at that window and send him reports. He's been waiting. The full horror of it climbed up her throat. He's been waiting to see if I'd ever work it out. And the morning I left for the manor, the watcher sent word by the fast post just like he promised. And that's the unsigned letter that beat me to this house. It wasn't a friend who wished us well. It was the spy warning him I'd cracked. Nathaniel had gone very still beside her. Then he knows, he said slowly. Evelyn, if the watcher sent word this morning that you'd come to the manor, then my uncle has known since this morning that you and I are under the same roof. He knew it before he ever walked in that door this afternoon and wept to me about your father. He knew it the whole time he was lying to my face. Evelyn looked up from the letter. Then this afternoon, she said, when he came home early and asked whose carriage was on the drive, he already knew whose. Nathaniel finished and his face had gone gray. He wasn't surprised to find a carriage. He was checking whether I'd tell him the truth about it. He was testing me, and I lied to him. I told him it was mine, that I was going to the bank. His jaw worked. And he let me lie. He smiled and let me ride him to the crossroad and waved me off to a bank he knows I'm not really going to. The two of them stared at each other over the open drawer, and the same understanding landed on them at the same instant, cold as creek water. He's not riding to town, Evelyn said. Is he? No, Nathaniel said quietly. I don't believe he is. From somewhere far off in the great house, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of the front door and a single set of boot heels, unhurried, crossing the front hall, and Richard Ashford's voice, warm and easy, and not the least bit surprised, calling out into the quiet, Caleb, Be a good man and tell my nephew I've changed my mind about town, and tell him—" The boot started down the long hall toward the east wing, toward the three of them frozen in his private study with his drawer standing open and his secrets spread out in their hands. "Tell him I'd like a word with whoever's been so very interested in my affairs." For 1/2 second, nobody in that room moved. Then Evelyn moved faster than she'd ever moved in her life. "The agreement's back in the drawer," she breathed, already laying the black-ribboned packet down, exactly as they sat, ribbon on top. "Ledger's under Mrs. Brooks, the candle pinch-it." "He'll see the smoke," the housekeeper hissed. "He'll see worse if it's burning. Pinch it." The boots were halfway down the long hall, unhurried. That was the terrible thing. Richard Ashford was not running. He had no need to run. He knew exactly where they were. Nathaniel caught Evelyn's wrist. "The spy's letter," he said low. "Don't put that one back." "What? Everything else?" "Yes. Put it all back. Let him think we found nothing. But that letter, the one from the Watcher, he'll never miss one page from the bottom of a drawer he thinks is still secret. And it's the one thing in this room that proves he didn't just rob me. It proves he hunted you." His eyes held hers. "Take it. Down your dress, your sleeve, anywhere. Take it, Evelyn." She took it. She slid it flat against her stays where no gentleman would look and no thief would think to, and she pushed the drawer shut, and Mrs. Brooks turned the small key and the lock clicked home, not 3 seconds before the study door swung wide and Richard Ashford stood in it. He filled the doorway, broad and easy, his riding coat still on his hat in his hand, and he looked at the three of them, his housekeeper, his nephew, and the butler's daughter. He'd ruined, standing in the middle of his locked private study, and he smiled. "Well," he said, "isn't this cozy?" Nobody answered him. Evelyn could feel her own heart going like a hammer and prayed it didn't show on her face. Beside her, she felt Mrs. Brooks shrinking, going small the way frightened servants learn to go small, and she hated it, and she understood it, and she made herself stand tall enough for the both of them. Richard's eyes moved over them, slow, unbothered, and came to rest on the housekeeper. "Abigail," he said, gentle as Sunday, "you let them in here." Mrs. Brooks's voice failed. "It's my room you've opened, Abigail. My private room. The one I trust you with." He clucked his tongue like a man disappointed in a hound. "After 30 years, I'd not have thought it of you." And Evelyn watched the old woman crumble, watched 2 winters of guilt and fear come down on her at once, and watched her open her mouth to apologize, to grovel, to save herself. And Evelyn could not let it happen. "She let me in," Evelyn said clearly. "Not them, me. I begged her. I told her I'd come for my mother's thimble, that I'd left it in the linen press the day I was put out, that it was all I had of her." The lie came smooth and fast and complete. Mrs. Brooks took pity on a grieving girl. "That's the whole of it. Whatever's to answer for, it's mine." Richard turned his gaze on her, and for the first time the warmth thinned just slightly, and underneath it she saw the cold thing that had killed Foster looking back at her. "Your mother's thimble," he said. "In my study, behind a locked door." "I got turned around in the East Wing," Evelyn said. "It's been 14 months. I forget which room is which." "You forget." He took a step into the room. "You, the girl who could recite the South accounts back to me from memory. You forget which room is which." Another step. "Come now, Miss Harper. We've always been honest with each other, you and I. Haven't we? I gave you work when no one else would. I kept you on when the estate could scarce afford it. I wept, do you remember? I wept when your father was put out, because I'm a man who feels these things deeply." His voice dropped, soft and intimate and obscene. "So let's not insult each other with thimbles. What were you looking for, and what?" His eyes flicked to the desk, to the drawer and back. "Did you find?" The room held its breath, and Nathaniel Ashford stepped forward, putting himself between his uncle and Evelyn, and said, "She found nothing, because there's nothing to find. Isn't that right, Uncle?" Boy, it was the perfect thing to say, and Evelyn knew it the moment it left his mouth because it dared the man. It dared him to say yes, nothing, and so admit there was nothing to fear, or to say no, and so admit there was. Richard's eyes moved to his nephew, and the two Ashfords looked at each other, and the whole crooked history between them seemed to stand up in the air of that room. "You lied to me this afternoon," Richard said, not angry, almost fond. "About the carriage. You told me it was yours. You told me you were writing to the bank." "I did." "Why would you lie to me, Nathaniel? Why would you let me?" Nathaniel said. The silence stretched, and then Richard Ashford laughed a real laugh, warm and rolling a laugh that filled the room and curdled Evelyn's blood, and he tossed his hat onto a chair like a man settling in for a pleasant evening. "Oh, you've got more of your grandfather in you than I credited," he said. "I always thought you a soft thing, a dreamer, a boy who'd rather ride his fences than read his books, and thank God for it. I used to think, thank God the boy's no head for figures, it makes the rest so much simpler." He shook his head, almost rueful. "And now look at you, standing in front of the servant girl like she's worth defending, asking me clever questions. Whatever's gotten into you, nephew?" "Truth," Nathaniel said. "Truth's gotten into me, uncle. It's a hard thing to get out again once it's in." "Truth." Richard said the word like he was tasting it. "And what truth is that?" "Marrow and vein," Evelyn said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out of her on its own, two words flat and even, and she watched them hit Richard Ashford square in the chest like a stone. And she watched for the first time, for one single unguarded instant, the smile drop clean off his face. It was only an instant. He had it back in a breath. But she'd seen it. They'd all seen it. And he knew they'd seen it. "I don't know what that is," he said. "You signed for it," Evelyn said. "Quarter after quarter. 5 years. $9,000 of Ashford rent money paid out to a firm that does no work on a farm, that's had no improvement, and every receipt for it signed in my father's hand. Except my father never signed a one of them, because my father can't make his H the way the forger makes it, and neither can your nephew, and neither I'd wager can you quite, but you know who can, don't you? You know the hand. You commissioned it." Richard Ashford stood very still. "Foster found it." Evelyn went on, and now her voice was rising just a little, the 14 months coming up in her at last. "5 years ago, Foster found the money walking out the back door, and he came to you, kind careful. Foster gave you the chance to explain, and 2 weeks later, he was dead in his bed. And then I found it. And you couldn't kill a clerk twice in 5 years without the whole county talking, so instead you ruined my father. You forged him into a thief so that when I finally proved the money was stolen, the man it'd hang on was already chosen. Already convicted, already gone north in disgrace where no one would listen to him." Her breath came short now. "You turned a 35-year servant into a scapegoat to cover your own theft, and then you paid a man in town to sit and watch him die of the shame of it and send you reports like it was sport." The room was dead silent. Mrs. Brooks was weeping without sound. Nathaniel had gone white and rigid. And Richard Ashford looked at Evelyn Harper for a long, long moment, and then he did the thing that frightened her more than any shouting could have. He sat down. He sat down in his own chair, behind his own desk, calm as a man sitting down to dinner, and he folded his hands on the blotter, and he said, "That is a remarkable story. Have you any proof of one word of it?" And there it was. The whole thing, the whole rotten, brilliant architecture of it, laid bare in a single question. Because they didn't. Not yet. The agreements were back in the locked drawer where he could burn them tonight. The South ledgers were under them. All Evelyn had against him in this room was a clerk's eye and a clerk's memory and a spy's letter pressed flat against her stays that she could not pull out now without showing her one card too soon. "You see," Richard said softly, watching the understanding cross her face. "This is the trouble with clever girls. You work the whole thing out, and you are clever. Miss Harper, I'll grant you that. You're the cleverest creature ever to balance these books. You work it all out in your head, every piece of it, and you're right. Every piece of it's right. And it does you not 1 ounce of good, because a story in your head is just a story. It's your word. A dismissed servant's daughter, a known liar. You've just lied to my face about a thimble against mine. And whose word does a magistrate take, do you imagine yours? Or the man who's managed the largest estate in this county for 30 years? My word, Nathaniel said. Richard turned to him. My word's in this too, Nathaniel said. I'll stand up in any court in this state and say my uncle robbed my estate and ruined an innocent man. I'm an Ashford. I own this land. They'll take my word over yours, uncle, and you know it. That's why your whole plan needed me kept stupid, kept happy in my saddle, never in my books. The day I learned to read my own ledgers, you're finished, and you've always known it, and that's why you'll do anything to keep me from looking. Isn't that right? Nathaniel took a step toward the desk. That's why Foster died the very week he came to you. That's why my father's man, Caldwell the lawyer, was dismissed 3 years back when I was a grief-blind boy who'd just buried his mother. You've spent 15 years making sure no honest man ever sat between me and the truth of my own affairs. And you almost got 15 more. His voice dropped low and shaking with something held very tight. But you made one mistake, uncle. You needed a clever clerk to keep the books while you robbed them, and you hired her. Richard Ashford looked from his nephew to the girl and back, and for the first time, something in his easy face began to come apart at the edges. You'll prove nothing, he said, and it came out lower now, harder. By morning there'll be nothing to prove. You think I don't know what's in my own drawer? You think I'll leave it sitting there for you to fetch a magistrate to the moment you're out of this room? You'll burn it, Evelyn said. Yes, we know. That's why we already copied it. It was a lie. There hadn't been time. She hadn't copied a single line. But she said it with the flat, dead certainty of pure truth, and she watched it go into Richard Ashford like a knife, watched his eyes flick involuntarily to the locked drawer, watched the first real fear move across the face of a man who'd been afraid of nothing his whole life. You're lying, he said. 5 years of agreements, Evelyn said, quarter by quarter, the South ledgers the real ones before you had them recopied. Every figure, every forged signature, all of it in my hand fair and true, and not in this house. She let that sink. Burn your originals tonight, Mr. Ashford. Go on, burn them. And tomorrow I'll lay my copies in front of the magistrate, and when he comes to find your drawer empty and ashes in your grate, why won't that look fine? An innocent man doesn't burn his papers in the night. Richard Ashford stared at her, and Evelyn Harper, 22 years old, Butler's daughter, looked the man who'd murdered Foster and ruined her father dead in the eye, and did not blink. You have no idea, she said quietly, how long I have waited to stop being afraid of you. What happened next happened fast. Richard Ashford came up out of his chair not a man anymore, not the warm, easy uncle, but something cornered and dangerous, and his hand went into the desk, into the unlocked top drawer, and came out with a small silver pistol, the kind a gentleman carries for the road, and the kind that kills a person just as dead as any other. Mrs. Brooks screamed. Nobody, Richard said, breathing hard, leveling it, is laying anything in front of any magistrate. He didn't point it at Nathaniel. He pointed it at Evelyn. Of course it's you, he said, and his voice had gone unsteady, a man improvising at the edge of ruin. It was always going to come down to you, the clever one. You know I half admired you, I did. Watching you work it out this past year, getting closer, never quite knowing what you held. I told myself when she gets too close, you'll deal with her the way you dealt with Foster. Quiet. A chill. An accident on the road. His thumb drew the hammer back. I just didn't think it'd be tonight. And I didn't think there'd be witnesses. Uncle Nathaniel started forward. Stand still. The pistol jerked toward Nathaniel, then back to Evelyn. You stand still, boy. You think I won't. You think after Foster, after all of it, I'll hang for the rest. But balk at this. I'm already a dead man if she talks. A dead man's got nothing left to fear. His eyes were wild now, his careful mask gone entirely. Here's what happens. The girl was a thief. Everyone knows the Harpers are thieves. I've spent $1 year and $9,000 making sure they know it. She broke into my study to rob me. There was a struggle. The pistol went off. A tragedy. And my grieving nephew. Your grieving nephew will tell them you murdered her, Nathaniel said. He'd stopped moving, but his voice was iron. In front of his own housekeeper. You'll hang twice over. Then maybe, Richard said softly, swinging the pistol a few degrees. There shouldn't be a housekeeper either. And that was the moment Evelyn would think on it the rest of her life. That was the moment old Abigail Brooks, 55 years old, who had spent 2 winters too afraid to speak, who had sent gentle Foster to his death, with a coward's blessing, and never slept clean, since stopped being afraid. She did not scream again. She did not run. She picked up the heavy brass candlestick from the shelf beside her, the one she'd polished 1,000 times with her own hands, and she brought it down across Richard Ashford's wrist, with every ounce of 30 years of guilt behind it. The pistol went off. The shot tore into the bookshelves and brought down a rain of plaster, and the gun spun away across the floor, and Richard Ashford howled and clutched his arm, and Nathaniel was on him before the echo died, not striking him, but pinning him, dragging him back and down into his own chair, and holding him there with both hands fisted in his uncle's fine coat. "Get the pistol," Nathaniel said, breathing hard. "Evelyn, the pistol." But Evelyn was already there. She'd crossed the room and scooped it up, and now she stood over the man who'd ruined her family, the pistol heavy and warm and steady in 2 hands that no longer shook at all, pointed at the floor because she was not Richard Ashford, and never would be. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, and her voice came out absolutely level. "Are you hurt?" "No, child." The old woman was shaking head to foot, the candlestick still gripped in her white-knuckled fist. "No, I'm Lord above. I'm all right." "You saved my life," Evelyn said. "I owed it," Mrs. Brooks whispered. "To Foster. I owed it." Richard Ashford sat slumped in his own chair, his nephew's hands fisted in his coat, his ruined wrist cradled against his chest, and the fight had gone out of him all at once, the way it goes out of a thing that's been running on nothing but nerve. "You'll get nothing," he said. But it came out weak now, a man talking to keep from drowning. A pistol that misfired. A clumsy old woman. There's no crime in a man defending his own home from intruders. You broke into my study. There's a man bleeding from a wrist his own housekeeper broke to keep him from murder, Nathaniel said. There's a hole in my bookshelf the size of my fist, and there's 3 witnesses who'll all swear to the same thing. You're done, Uncle. The only question left is how done. He let go of the coat and stepped back, breathing hard, looking down at the man who'd raised him. Crooked. "Caleb," he called, not taking his eyes off Richard. "Caleb, get up here, and send the stable boy riding for Mr. Carter fast as the horse'll go. Tell him it's life and death. Tell him to bring the magistrate." Boots came pounding up the hall, and Richard Ashford, hearing them, did the last thing, the thing that turned Evelyn's stomach and proved finally and fully the kind of man he was. He turned his face up to his nephew, and the wildness drained out of it, and the warmth came flooding back. The false, fatherly warmth, the weeping uncle, the man who'd held a county in his palm for 30 years on the strength of seeming kind. "Nathaniel," he said, soft and broken. "Son, think what you're doing. Think of the name. The Ashford name. You drag me before a magistrate. It's not just me that hangs, it's the family. It's everything your father built, everything your grandfather built. The scandal. You'll be the Ashford who couldn't keep his own house, whose own uncle they'll never let you forget it. Your children won't forget it." His voice dropped to a whisper, urgent, intimate, the serpent at the very last. "Let me go. Tonight. I'll ride out and you'll never see me again. I swear it on your mother's grave. The money's gone. I'll not trouble you for more. Just let me go, and we keep this in the family, and the Ashford name stays clean. For your father's sake. For your mother's. She loved me, Nathaniel. Your mother loved me. Would she want to see her own brother-in-law hang?" And Nathaniel Ashford stood very still, and Evelyn watched him. And for one terrible moment, she did not know what he would do, because she saw it cost him. saw the boy who'd had no father and been glad of any kindness, war with the man who finally knew the truth, and she said nothing because this was his to choose, and she would not choose it for him. Nathaniel crouched down, the way he'd crouched beside her chair that afternoon a lifetime ago. He brought himself level with his uncle's face. "You taught me a great deal," Nathaniel said quietly. "More than I knew. You taught me a man can smile while he robs you. You taught me kindness can be a costume. You taught me to mistrust my own eyes for 30 years. He shook his head slowly. "But Thomas Harper taught me to ride, and to keep my word, and to give back a shilling in the rain, and to sit with a frightened boy in the dark and ask nothing for it. So, no, uncle, I don't believe I'll be letting you go, and I don't believe my mother who did love you. You're right, I don't believe she'd want her name kept clean by the same kind of lie that killed an old bookkeeper and broke a good man's heart." He stood. "The Ashford name will survive being honest. It's a thing it hasn't tried in some while. We'll see how it wears." Caleb came through the door then, and two stable hands behind him, and they took in the scene. The pistol in Evelyn's hands, the plaster on the floor. Mrs. Brooks with the candlestick. Richard slumped and bleeding, and Caleb, old Caleb, who'd carried Evelyn on his shoulders, looked at his master and said, "Only, what do you need, Mr. Ashford?" "Hold him," Nathaniel said. "Don't hurt him, but don't let him near that desk, near the grate, near anything that burns. Mr. Carter's coming with the magistrate. Until they're here, nothing in this room moves." He turned. "Evelyn, give Caleb the pistol. You don't need to hold that anymore." She did. Her hands were steady as she passed it over, and only after it left them did she feel how tired her arms had gone. It was full dark outside by the time the magistrate came. A heavy, slow, unhappy man named Pruitt, rousted from his supper, who clearly thought he'd been called out for nothing until he stepped into Richard Ashford's study and saw the bullet hole and the blood, and heard the first 3 sentences out of Nathaniel's mouth. After that he sat down and got very quiet and sent for his clerk. And Evelyn, when her turn came, did not give them a story in her head. She gave them the drawer. She had Mrs. Brooks unlock it in front of the magistrate, in front of his clerk, in front of Mr. Carter, the lawyer who'd come with his nightshirt still tucked hasty into his trousers, and she laid it all out on the desk under the lamp. The black-ribboned agreements, 5 years of them. The South ledgers. The forged signatures with their hooked H's and their low crossbars. And she stood beside the magistrate and walked him through it the way she'd walked Nathaniel through it that afternoon, plain and fast and unanswerable, figure by figure, forgery by forgery, until even slow, unhappy Pruitt was leaning forward with his glasses pushed up on his forehead, muttering, good God in heaven." "And there's one thing more," Evelyn said. She reached into her stays and drew out the spy's letter, the one Nathaniel had told her to take, the one she'd pressed flat against her heart all through the long, terrible evening, and she unfolded it and laid it on top of everything else. "This man didn't only rob his nephew and ruin my father," she said. "When my father was cast out broken, sent north in disgrace, Mr. Ashford paid a man in town to keep us close and watch us, and send him word of how my father failed, day by day. He wanted to see it. Read it for yourself, sir. Read what kind of man you've got sitting in that chair." Her voice did not shake. It had gone past shaking into something cold and clear and final. "My father gave this family 35 years. He polished the door he was thrown out of. And this man paid good money to watch him die of grief at a window like a play put on for his amusement. Me." Pruitt read the letter. He read it twice. And when he looked up at Richard Ashford, the last shred of the doubt that had walked in with him was gone. "Richard Ashford," he said heavily, "you'll come with me tonight, and God help you, because I don't see how anyone else can." They took him out through the front hall and through the front door, the door Evelyn had knocked on that afternoon with a ring in her pocket and murder in her heart, and they put him in the magistrate's wagon, and Richard Ashford did not say one more word to anyone and did not look back. When the wagon had gone, and the sound of it had faded down the long drive into the summer dark, Evelyn stood in the front hall of Ashford Manor and found that her legs would no longer quite hold her. Nathaniel was there before she fell. He had her by the elbows, easing her down onto the bottom step of the great staircase, crouching in front of her, the way he seemed always to end up crouching in front of her, bringing himself low. "It's done," he said. "Evelyn, look at me. It's done. He's gone. It's over. It's not over." Her teeth had begun to chatter, the cold coming up now that the danger had passed, the body finally allowed to be afraid after the fact. "My father still thinks I came here to throw your ring at you. My father's still sitting at that window in town believing the whole county thinks him a thief. He doesn't know any of this. He doesn't know I found you. He doesn't know his name." Her voice broke clean in half. "His name still ruined Nathaniel. We caught the man, but everybody out there still thinks Thomas Harper's a thief. Catching Richard in this room doesn't change one thing they say in town tomorrow. Beaufoyer. Boishen." And Nathaniel Ashford, kneeling on the floor of his own front hall, took both her cold hands in his warm ones and held them and did not let go. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we don't whisper this in a study with the door locked. Tomorrow we don't hide. Mr. Carter is going to draw up everything we found tonight into a document with the magistrate's own seal on it. And then your father isn't going to hear from the county that he's been cleared." "Otatitis itintidi." His grip tightened. "Your father is going to hear it from me, in person, in front of every man who watched him walk out that servant's door. I'm going to stand up in front of all of them, the whole county, and I'm going to tell them what Thomas Harper is, and what my uncle was, and which of the two of them this family was proud to call its own. And I'm going to keep telling it until there's not a soul left in this state who dare say his name without taking their hat off first." Evelyn looked at him through her tears. "You do that," she said. "Stand up in front of everyone, an Ashford, and say your own uncle was the thief and a servant the honest man." "I'd do that tonight if the sun were up," Nathaniel said. "Your father covered for me when I broke the orangery glass, Evelyn. 30 years ago. He took the blame off a boy who wasn't even his own. The least I can do is take the blame off him now that it's mine to give back." He helped her to her feet, slow, steady, his hands sure. "We'll go to him tomorrow, together. And this time you'll walk in through whatever door you please, because after tomorrow, there isn't a door in this county that'll dare stay shut to Thomas Harper's daughter." They rode into town the next morning with the magistrate's sealed document in Nathaniel's saddlebag, and the sun barely up, and Evelyn could not make herself sit still in the carriage. "He'll be at the window," she said, for the 10th time. "He's always at the window by now. He'll see us coming, and he won't know what to think. A carriage from the manor, me riding in it. After what they told him." She pressed her hands together hard in her lap. "He'll think they've sent for me. He'll think I'm in trouble. Or worse, he'll think I've gone over to them that I've—" "Evelyn." Nathaniel's voice was steady. "In an hour he'll know everything. Hold on for one more hour." But she couldn't, and they both knew she couldn't, because the apothecary was coming up on the right now, and the 2 cheap windows above it. And there in the second one, was the shape she'd have known anywhere in the world, the bent shoulders, the still gray head, her father sitting where he always sat, looking out at a street that had decided he was a thief. Evelyn was out of the carriage before it fully stopped. "Evelyn!" Nathaniel called, but she was already through the apothecary's side door and up the narrow stairs 2 at a time, calling out, "Papa, Papa, it's me!" And she heard the chair scrape inside. Heard the old man's voice come back uncertain and afraid. "Evelyn, girl, what's happened? What's wrong?" And then she was through the door and across the little room, and she had her arms around her father before he could rise all the way out of the chair. "Nothing's wrong," she said into his shoulder, and she was weeping now fully, the tears she'd refused for 14 months coming all at once. "Nothing's wrong, Papa. Everything's right. For the first time, everything's right." Thomas Harper held his daughter and looked over her shoulder, bewildered, and saw the door fill behind her. Saw Nathaniel Ashford standing in it, hat in his hands. And the old man went very still. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Thomas Harper held his daughter and stared at the master of Ashford Manor, standing humble in the doorway of 2 cheap rented rooms, and Evelyn felt her father's whole body change, felt the wariness come into him, The hurt, the 35 years, and the bitter end of them. Mr. Ashford, Thomas said at last. Careful, even. The voice of a servant who has been wronged and will not let it show. This is a surprise. You'll forgive the state of the rooms. We weren't expecting... He stopped. His eyes moved to his daughter's tear-streaked face, then back. Evelyn, what is this? Why is he here? And Nathaniel Ashford, who could have stayed in the doorway, who could have let Evelyn explain, who could have kept the dignity of his name and his height and his money. Nathaniel Ashford crossed the little room and got down on one knee in front of the old man's chair. The way he'd knelt in the study, the way he seemed to know, was the only honest way to speak to a Harper, and he set his hat on the floor. Thomas, he said, I've come to ask your forgiveness, though I don't expect you to give it, and you'd be right not to. Get up, Thomas said, alarmed. Mr. Ashford, sir, get up off the floor, you can't. I let them put you out of my house, Nathaniel said, not getting up. After 35 years, after you taught me to ride and fished me out of the mill pond and sat with me the night my mother died. I came home, and they told me you'd stolen, and I believed it, and I let you go north in disgrace with your name in the mud, and I never once, his voice caught, I never once thought to question it. I never once thought not Thomas. Thomas would walk 2 miles in the rain to give back a shilling. I let 1 year of lies undo 35 years of knowing exactly who you were. And that's my shame, Thomas, mine, and I'll carry it the rest of my life whether you forgive me or not. Thomas Harper sat very still in his chair. His daughter's hand gripped in his and looked down at the kneeling man. I never stole a thing in my life, he said. Quiet. Cracked. The thing he'd been saying to a window for 14 months, said now to a face. Not a thing, sir. Not in 63 years. I know, Nathaniel said. I know that now. I can prove it now. And so does the magistrate, and so will every soul in this county before the week is out. He reached up and took the old man's free hand in both of his. It was my Uncle Thomas. It was Richard, the whole time. The money, the forged letters your name signed to things you never touched. He robbed me blind for 5 years and laid it all at your door so no one would ever look at his. And when you got close, when honest Foster got close, he stopped and made himself say it. He had Foster killed Thomas, and he'd have done the same to Evelyn last night if Mrs. Brooks hadn't broken his arm with a candlestick. The old man's eyes went wide. His grip on his daughter's hand spasmed. Last night, Evelyn... He turned to her frantic. He had a gun on you. It's over, Papa, she said, holding him. It's over. He's in the magistrate's keeping. He'll never touch any of us again. And your name, Papa, listen, your name is going to be cleared. In front of everyone. Mr. Ashford's going to stand up in front of the whole county and tell them the truth. Thomas Harper looked from his daughter to the kneeling man and back, and something in the old servant's careful, beaten face began very slowly to break open. 35 years, he whispered. I kept that door. I kept it shining. And they sent me out it like I was nothing. And every day at that window I told myself a clear conscience was enough. His voice failed. It wasn't enough, sir. God forgive me, it wasn't. I wanted them to know. I wanted just one of them to know I was no thief before I died. They'll all know, Nathaniel said. Every one of them. I swear it to you on my mother's grave, and unlike my uncle, I don't swear that lightly. He pressed the old man's hand. But I won't do it without your leave, Thomas. It's your name. If you'd rather we keep it quiet, settle it private, spare you the spectacle. No. Thomas Harper said it before Nathaniel finished. And for the first time in 14 months, something straightened in the old man's spine. No, sir. They watched me go out that door in shame. Let them watch the truth come back in. I've earned that much. I'll stand up in front of every last one of them, and I'll do it on my own 2 feet. It took 3 days for Mr. Carter to make the arrangements, and Nathaniel made them grand on purpose. He did not call a quiet meeting. He did not send around a discreet letter. He had Carter draw up the magistrate's findings into a formal document sealed and witnessed, and then he invited personally by name every man of standing in the county to dine at Ashford Manor. The magistrate Pruitt, the lawyer Carter, the bank's officers who'd watched the Ashford accounts for years and never questioned a withdrawal, the minister, the men who sat on the county board, the merchants whose shops had whispered thief when Thomas Harper passed. He invited the very men who'd believed the worst, and he invited them to the very house the lie was born in, and not one of them dared refuse an Ashford's invitation. What none of them knew riding up that drive in their Sunday coats expecting a fine dinner was that the dinner was a trial. Evelyn stood at the side of the great dining room as they filed in, and she watched their faces, and she saw the moment each of them noticed the two figures who did not belong at a gentleman's table. Old Thomas Harper, in his one good coat brushed and pressed, standing straight by the hearth, and his daughter, the dismissed clerk, standing beside him. The whispers started before the soup. "Is that the Harper man? What's he doing here? Ashford's lost his senses, dining a thief." Evelyn heard every word. She watched her father hear them too. Watched the old muscle in his jaw tighten. Watched him hold his ground anyway. Because she'd asked him to, because Nathaniel had asked him to, because the worst of it was nearly over. And then Nathaniel Ashford stood up at the head of his own table, and the room went quiet. "Gentlemen," he said, "I thank you for coming. I won't keep you long from your dinner, but before we eat, I've a matter to put before you, and I'd ask you to hear it out, because every man at this table had a hand in it whether he knows it or not." He let that sit. Evelyn watched the men shift in their chairs. 14 months ago, Nathaniel went on, a thief was found in this house. $9,000 gone out of the Ashford accounts over 5 years. A man was named for it. A man was put out of this house in disgrace after 35 years of service and sent north with his name ruined, and not a single one of you. His eyes moved over them slow, unflinching. Not a single one of you asked whether it was true. I didn't ask. I'm the worst of all of you because I knew him best, and I didn't ask. We all just knew it must be the servant. Of course it was the servant. Who else would it be? The room was dead silent now. "It was not the servant," Nathaniel said. He turned and held out his hand, and Evelyn stepped forward with the leather folio, her folio, the one she'd built with her own 2 hands, and she laid it open on the long table among the silver and the crystal. And she began to do in front of 40 of the most powerful men in the county, the thing she did better than anyone alive. She did not raise her voice. She did not weep. She did not plead. She was Thomas Harper's daughter, and she gave them the figures. "Marrow and vein," she said, and laid down the first agreement. "A firm that does no work on a farm that's seen no improvement in 20 years. The South rent came in," she laid down the ledger, and walked straight back out to this firm the same day every quarter for 5 years. $9,040, gentlemen. Here are the dates. Here are the sums. You may check my arithmetic. I'd welcome it." A banker leaned forward despite himself. Then another. "And here," Evelyn said, "is the signature that accepted that money quarter after quarter." She laid down the forged agreement. "My father's name, Thomas Harper. Except," she laid the real thing beside it, a true letter in her father's true hand. "My father's never made his H like that in 63 years. Look, the forger hooks the top. My father never has. And the man who wrote this," she touched the forgery, "is the same man who wrote this." And down came the dismissal letter, the one with Nathaniel's forged name. Because look at the hook. Look at the low crossbar. The same hand forged my father's name to make him a thief, and forged Mr. Ashford's name to make it look like Mr. Ashford cast him out. One forger, one hand, one man behind all of it. She straightened. "And that man," she said, "is the man who managed this estate for 30 years, Richard Ashford, who sits tonight in the magistrate's keeping charged with theft with forgery, and," her voice did not waver, "with the murder of your old bookkeeper Foster, who found this same trail 5 years ago, and who died of a sudden chill in his bed 2 weeks after he carried his suspicions to Richard Ashford's door." The room erupted. Pruitt the magistrate rose heavily and held up the sealed document. "It's true," he said over the noise. "Every word of it. I've examined the evidence myself. There'll be a trial and Ashford will hang or rot, but the findings are not in question. The girl has it exactly right. Thomas Harper is no thief. He never was. This house." He looked around at them all hard, and frankly, this county owes that man an apology it can never fully pay. And the noise died down into something worse than noise, into shame. Evelyn watched it move across 40 faces, the merchants who'd whispered the board members, who'd nodded along the men who'd crossed the street rather than tip a hat to a ruined old servant. She watched them not be able to look at Thomas Harper, and she found to her surprise that she took no joy in it. She only felt tired and clean, the way you feel when a fever finally breaks. Yet, it was Nathaniel who would not let them look away. "I see you can't meet his eye," he said into the quiet. "Good. Neither could I the morning I understood what I'd done. But you'll meet it now, every one of you, before you eat a bite at my table." He came around to where Thomas Harper stood by the hearth, and he stood beside the old man, shoulder to shoulder, servant and master, and he faced the room. "This is Thomas Harper. He served this house 35 years. He gave back a shilling once to a fishmonger who overpaid him, walked 2 miles in the rain to do it. He taught a motherless Ashford boy to ride and never asked a thing for it. He is the most honest man I have ever known, and I include in that every gentleman in this room, myself first of all." He turned to the old man. "Thomas," he said, "I wrote something. I'd like to read it with your leave in front of these men, and then I'd like to put it in your hand." Thomas Harper, overcome, could only nod, and Nathaniel drew a folded paper from his coat, a letter in his own hand, his own true hand, and he read it aloud, his voice steady and carrying to every corner of the silent room. It was an apology, a full one. It named what had been done and who had done it, and how the house had failed. It restored Thomas Harper's character without reservation or excuse. It thanked him by name for 35 years, and it closed with an offer not of charity. Nathaniel was careful to say, not of pity, but of a thing earned the position of steward of Ashford Manor, the highest place of trust on the estate. The place Richard had held offered now to the honest man the lie had been built to bury. He folded it and he put it into Thomas Harper's hands. And the old man who had sat at a window for 14 months, telling himself a clear conscience was enough, who had wanted only for one soul to know. He was no thief before he died, stood in the great dining room of the house that had cast him out, and held his vindication in his own 2 hands, and wept openly without shame, while 40 powerful men watched and could say nothing at all. Evelyn went to him. She put her arm around her father, and he leaned on her, and the 2 of them stood there together in front of all of them. "I told you, Papa," she whispered. "I told you everything would be right." "You did, girl." His voice was wrecked. "You did. My clever girl. You did what I couldn't. You made them know." Ned. The men did not stay long after that. There was no appetite among them for a fine dinner. One by one, before they left, the bravest of them came to Thomas Harper and took his hand. Some could only mumble, some could barely look at him, but the merchant who'd whispered loudest came and gripped the old man's hand hardest and said rough and low, "I judged you wrong, Harper. I judged you wrong, and I'm ashamed. You'll have my custom and my respect the rest of my days, and I'll knock down any man who says a word against you." And Thomas Harper, gracious to the last, only nodded and said, "That's kind. That's kind of you. Let's not speak of it again," and let the man go with his dignity, which was more than the man had let him keep. When the last of them had gone down the drive, the great house was quiet, and it was only the 4 of them left in the emptied dining room. Thomas in a chair now spent the vindication still clutched in his hands. Mrs. Brooks, who'd watched from the doorway with her apron pressed to her mouth the whole evening. Evelyn and Nathaniel. "Mrs. Brooks," Nathaniel said, "come here if you would." The old housekeeper came wary. "You broke my uncle's arm with a candlestick to save this girl's life," Nathaniel said. "And before that, You carried a guilty thing for 2 winters, because you were afraid, and I understand fear, and I'll not hold the silence against you, not when you broke it, the moment it counted, with a gun pointed at your own head. But I'll not let it go unmarked either." He took her hand. "You'll have a place in this house as long as you want one, and a pension after a tea and Foster's stone, the one my uncle bought to look generous. I'm going to have it taken up, and a true one put in its place that says the truth, that he was an honest man who died serving this estate. You'll help me write what goes on it. You knew him best." Mrs. Brooks could not speak. She pressed his hand and nodded and wept. And Evelyn understood that the old woman had just been allowed finally to set down the last of the weight she'd carried up the east wing stairs 3 nights ago. And then it was quiet again, and Nathaniel turned to Evelyn, and the whole long, terrible reckoning seemed to settle, and still around the 2 of them, standing in the lamplight. "It's done," he said softly. "Truly done now. Your father's a steward. His name's restored in front of every man who mattered. My uncle will answer to the law for all of it. Foster will have his truth on his stone." He looked at her, and something uncertain came into his steady face, something almost shy, almost afraid in a man who'd faced down a pistol 3 nights past without flinching. "There's only one thing left unsettled, and it's the one I've no right to ask about after everything, so I won't ask it tonight." Evelyn looked at him. She knew what he meant. The ring. It still sat where she'd left it 3 nights ago on the corner of the study desk where they could both see it. Neither of them had touched it since. "My father's steward of Ashford Manor," she said slowly. "Cleared, honored, set up better than he ever was. I came to this house to throw your ring at you, Mr. Ashford, and instead I've got everything I ever wanted out of it and more." She drew a breath. "Which means there's no duty left in it now. No bargain. No protecting my father, no saving his name. All of that's done. If there were ever to be anything more between us, it couldn't be any of those things that made it. It would have to be only the one thing. The thing neither of us has said plain, because we've both been too busy and too frightened and too proud." "Evelyn, not tonight," she said, and there was a small, unsteady smile on her face, now the first real one he'd seen from her. "You said you wouldn't ask it tonight, and you're right not to. My father's worn out. The house is still full of the smell of 40 men's shame. It's no kind of night for it." She held his eyes. "But you were also right 3 days ago in your hall when you said there isn't a door in this county that'll dare stay shut to Thomas Harper's daughter anymore. So I'll tell you this much, and then I'll see my father home to rooms he'll only have to sleep in a few nights more." Her smile steadied. "When you do ask it, and I think you will, you'll ask it properly. Not for the estate, not for duty, not for any reason but the true one. And I'll give you my answer then, in a room with the door wide open where any soul in the world is welcome to hear it." Thomas Harper moved into the steward's quarters at Ashford Manor at the end of that week, and Evelyn moved with him, and the strangeness of it sat on both of them for days. The butler's daughter sleeping under the roof, she'd only ever cleaned walking through the front hall like she belonged in it, which Nathaniel insisted every single day that she did. But she did not let him ask the question, not because she did not want him to. She wanted it more than she let herself say. But she'd learned something in that locked study, and that pistol-cracked room, and that dining hall full of ashamed men. She'd learned that a thing done too fast is a thing you never fully trust afterward, and she would not build the rest of her life on a foundation poured in the heat of a single terrible week. "Wait," she told him the first time she caught the question rising in his face in the garden 3 days after her father moved in. "Not yet." "Evelyn, you don't even know if you mean it," she said gently. "You think you do. But you've just lost your uncle, the only family you had found out he was a murderer, turned your whole house upside down. A man reaches for something steady after a thing like that. I won't be the thing you reach for because you're falling." She put her hand briefly on his arm. "If you still want to ask me in a year, if you want it when the dust's long settled, and your house is quiet, and there's no fear left to push you toward me, then ask. And I'll know it's true, and so will you." "A year," he said. "A year." He looked like he might argue. Then slowly he nodded because he was a man who'd spent 30 years acting on false evidence and had sworn never to do it again, and he understood better than most the worth of being sure. "A year then," he said. "But I'll tell you now, Evelyn Harper, so it said, and you can't pretend you didn't know a year won't change it. I'll feel exactly the same when the dust's settled as I do standing here. I just won't be able to prove it to you till then." He paused. "So I'll spend the year proving it instead." And he did. They worked side by side through that whole long year, and it was the work that healed them more than any words could have. The estate had been bled for 5 years, and putting it right took every bit of Evelyn's gift for figures and every bit of Nathaniel's slow steadiness and her father's 35 years of knowing where every dollar and every fence post on the land truly stood. Thomas Harper, restored to his full self, turned out to be the finest steward the estate had seen in a generation. Not because he was clever with a pen, the way his daughter was, but because the tenants trusted him. The workers trusted him, and a man they trusted could get more honest work and honest rent out of that land than any number of Richard Ashford's forged improvements ever had. The $9,000 came back, most of it. Richard had hidden it less cleverly than he'd stolen it, and Evelyn followed it through the books like a hound on a scent until she'd run nearly all of it to ground. Nathaniel did not pocket a dollar of what was recovered. He used it on Evelyn's quiet suggestion to do the things the estate had failed to do for years. He fixed the tenant farms that had truly gone to ruin while the upkeep money walked out the back door. He raised the wages of the field hands and the house staff both. And he set aside a sum at Thomas's urging for the families of estate workers who fell ill or too old to work, so that no servant of Ashford Manor would ever again be put out a door with nothing. Richard Ashford was tried that autumn, Evelyn testified. So did her father and Mrs. Brooks and the magistrate and the bankers, who'd finally gone back through the accounts and found everything exactly where Evelyn said it would be. The watcher from town, the landlord who'd spied on the Harpers for pay, turned on his employer the moment the law came for him, and his testimony about the surveillance about the reports sent by fast post about the casual cruelty of a man who'd paid to watch an old servant break did more to turn the county against Richard Ashford than all the forged ledgers combined. There was no proving the murder of Foster outright after 5 years, and a body long buried, but there did not need to be. The forgery and the theft were enough. Richard Ashford was stripped of every cent and every claim, sentenced to a long imprisonment from which a man of 58 was unlikely to walk out, and led from the courtroom without one soul to mourn his going. He looked at Nathaniel on his way out. One last time. Evelyn watched it. "The name," Richard said low and bitter. "You've ruined the Ashford name." "No, Uncle," Nathaniel said. "You ruined it. I'm just the one who stopped pretending otherwise." And that was the last word that ever passed between them. The year turned. Summer came back around to Virginia, a full circle from the rainy autumn afternoon. Evelyn had first walked up that drive with a ring in her pocket and murder in her heart. She was a different woman by then, and she knew it. She'd come to that house bent under 14 months of fear and grief. She left it behind, not the house, but the fear somewhere in that year of honest work. She laughed now. Mrs. Brooks remarked on it once that she'd never heard the Harper girl laugh in all the months she'd kept the books, and now the sound of it came down the halls regular as birdsong. Her father was well, hale and proud and busy, sleeping clean through the night, his name spoken in town, with the hat coming off just as Nathaniel had promised. The pony shoe still hung by his bed, but now there was a new horseshoe beside it, off Nathaniel's own gelding, hung there by Nathaniel himself one evening without a word, and the two old shoes hung together, and neither man ever spoke of it, and both of them knew what it meant. And through all that year, Nathaniel Ashford kept his word and proved his point. He proved it in small things, mostly because Evelyn had taught him that the small things were where the truth lived. He noticed when her hands were tired from a long day in the ledgers, and he'd quietly take the next day's accounts onto his own desk to spare her badly with his poor head for figures, and she'd find them half wrong the next morning and fix them laughing, and the wrongness was its own kind of love letter. He remembered how she took her tea. He remembered the day her mother had died years past, and on the anniversary, He said nothing, but had her favorite flowers cut and set in the steward's quarters where she'd find them. He never once in a whole year mentioned the ring. He let it sit on the corner of the study desk exactly where she'd set it down, the night they'd caught his uncle, and he dusted around it himself rather than let anyone move it. And it became a thing in that house that everyone knew about, and no one touched the master's ring, waiting on the corner of the desk for a year for a woman who'd told him to ask her properly, or not at all. It was Evelyn who broke first in the end, not Nathaniel. She'd have thought it would be him. He was the one who'd wanted to ask from the start. But the year wore on, and the dust settled exactly as she'd predicted, and she watched him. Not ask, watched him hold to his word, with a patience that undid her more than any pressing ever could have. And one summer evening, she found that she could not wait out her own year a single day longer. She went to the study. He was at the desk frowning at a column of figures he'd got wrong, and he looked up when she came in, and she crossed the room before he could rise. He still rose for her every time a year on, and she put her hand flat on the page to stop his frowning at it. "You've carried the 7, she said. "It's a 6. "It's a 6, he agreed, not looking at the page. "Nathaniel." She'd never used his given name plain like that, not once in the whole year, and she watched it land on him, watched him go still. "The year's not quite up. 6 days short by my count, and you'd never break your word over 6 days, would you? You'd sit there and not ask me for 6 more days if it killed you." "I would," he said quietly. "I know you would." Her voice had gone unsteady. "That's the trouble. That's exactly the trouble. I told you to wait a year so I'd know it was true and not just fear. Well, it's been a year. Near as makes no difference, and the fear's long gone and the dust's long settled, and you've spent every day of it noticing my tired hands, and remembering my tea, and hanging a horseshoe by my father's bed, and not saying one word about that ring sitting right there." Her voice broke. "And I can't do the last 6 days, Nathaniel. I can't. I'm not as patient as you. I never was." She went to the corner of the desk. The ring sat where it had sat for a year, dust kept off it waiting. She picked it up. And then Evelyn Harper did the thing she'd come to that house a year ago, meaning to do in anger, and did it now in something else entirely. She put the ring into Nathaniel Ashford's hand and closed his fingers over it. "There," she said through her tears, smiling. "Now you've got it back the way I came to give it to you. So we're even. We're square. There's no duty in it, no bargain, no father to protect, no name to save all of that's done and dead and a year behind us. There's only the one thing left, the true thing, the thing we've both been too proud to say." She drew a breath. "So, this time say it properly. Ask me, in this room where the door once locked me in. Ask me right, and I'll give you my answer, and the door can stay wide open while I do, because I don't care anymore who hears it." Nathaniel Ashford stood and opened his hand and looked at the ring he'd waited a year for sitting in his palm. And then he got down, not on one knee in apology, this time, the way he'd knelt to her in that first locked room, the way he'd knelt to her father in 2 cheap rooms above an apothecary. But on one knee, in the oldest and best way, a man kneels to a woman, and he took her hand, and he looked up at her with no fear left in him at all. "Evelyn Harper," he said, "I have loved you since the first month you balanced my books and told me to my face I'd carried a 7 that should have been a 6. I loved you when you walked up my drive, certain I'd ruined your family and brave enough to spit my ring back at me anyway. I loved you across a locked door and a loaded pistol and a year of figures, and I'll love you when we're both as gray as your father, and I'll still rise when you come into a room every time, till the day I can't rise anymore." His voice did not waver. "Not for the estate, not for duty, not for any reason in this world, but that I cannot imagine one more honest day of my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" And Evelyn Harper Butler's daughter, who had come to that house through the front gate for the first time in her life, carrying a ring she'd meant to throw, looked down at the man kneeling in the open-doored study and said, "Yes." Just that, plain and true and steady, the way she said everything that mattered. "Yes, Nathaniel. Of course it's yes. It's been yes for a year. I was only waiting for you to ask me right." He stood, and he put the ring on her finger where it belonged, and the door stood wide open the whole time. And old Caleb, passing in the hall, saw and went and told Mrs. Brooks. And within the hour the whole house knew, and within the day the whole county. They married in the autumn, a year and a season after the rainy afternoon that started it all. Thomas Harper gave his daughter away, walking her down on his own 2 steady feet, in a fine new coat that fit him, his head high, his name, his own again, and shining. Mrs. Brooks cried through the whole ceremony, and apologized to everyone for it, and could not stop. Caleb stood up front, in the place of honor. The county came, all of them. The very men who'd whispered thief now packed into the church to watch a servant's daughter marry the master of Ashford Manor, and not one of them dared think it anything but right, because they'd all sat at that dinner table a year past, and learned exactly what the Harpers were made of, and exactly what they themselves were made of, and the lesson had taken. Evelyn did not stop working the books after she married. She'd have laughed at the suggestion. She ran the accounts of Ashford Manor with her father's help for the rest of his good long life, and after on her own, and the estate prospered as it never had under Richard's forged improvements, because honest figures kept by a clever hand will always outpace a thief's given time. And she did one thing more in the years that followed that the county remembered longest. She never forgot the 2 cheap rooms above the apothecary, or her father at the window, or the 14 months of being disbelieved that nearly killed an honest man. So when the estate could spare it, she built something. Not a grand thing at first, just a small house in town, plainly furnished, where a servant put out of work through no fault of their own, or an old worker too gray to labor and too proud to beg, could come and stay and keep their dignity until honest work was found or honest rest was earned. She put Mrs. Brooks in charge of it, and Mrs. Brooks ran it like the salvation it was, and over the years it grew and took in more, and the county came to call it the Harper House, after the steward whose name had been dragged through the mud and given back shining, and after his daughter who'd never once forgotten what it was to be cast out a door with nothing. Foster got his stone, a true one, an honest man who kept faith with his books and his conscience, and was failed by neither. Mrs. Brooks chose the words and visited it every Sunday until she was too old to walk, and then Evelyn drove her in the carriage, and the 2 women sat by it together and said nothing, because nothing needed saying anymore. Years later, when Evelyn Ashford was an old woman herself, gray as her father had been with children grown and grandchildren underfoot, a young clerk new to the estate asked her once, not knowing the whole story, knowing only the legend of it, whether it was true that the master had locked her in a room the day she came to give back his ring. "He did," Evelyn said. "Weren't you frightened, ma'am?" The old woman looked at the young one a long moment, and then she smiled, the steady smile she'd smiled her whole long life, and she said the thing that the household would repeat after she was gone, the thing they'd carve in shorter words on her own stone in time. "He locked one door that day, child, so that the truth couldn't run out of the room before we'd both looked it in the eye. And every door in that house has stood open ever since." She folded her old, clever hands in her lap. That's the whole of a good marriage, if you want to know it. One hard locked hour when you make yourselves stay and hear each other out, and then a lifetime of open doors.